What is the cost of a single day's delay in war? Sometimes it is one battle. Sometimes it is an entire civilization. As the summer of 466 BC drew to a close, the shores of Pamphylia concealed a threat that Hellas preferred to ignore. At the mouth of the Eurymedon River, where the murky silt mingled with the deep blue of the Mediterranean, the Persian fleet had been at anchor for weeks. This was no mere patrol or reconnaissance force. It was an armada. 350 warships, Phoenician and Cilician, drawn up in dense ranks along the shore. And it was waiting for reinforcements. The Persian Empire had not forgotten Salamis. 14 years had passed since King Xerxes, seated upon his golden throne overlooking the strait, watched his fleet shatter under the ramming blows of Greek triremes. Those 14 years had been spent in humiliation, regrouping, and covert preparation. The Achaemenid power was not in a hurry. It was vast. It possessed time and resources that the small Greek city-states could never hope to match. Or so the Persian strategists believed. While the Persian camp methodically tallied provisions and awaited 80 Phoenician ships from Cyprus, one man in Athens studied the same waters through intelligence reports. His name was Cimon, son of Miltiades, the same Miltiades who, 24 years earlier, had routed the Persian infantry at Marathon. Cimon inherited more than just his father's name and reputation. He possessed a cold understanding of a fundamental truth. The Persian Empire was strong only when it was given the time to deploy. Intercept the Colossus while it was in motion, and it would crumble. Cimon was the strategos of Athens. He was not merely a commander by title, but a man who had made the war with Persia his life's work. He did not waste time with fiery speeches before the assembly. Instead, he counted ships, inspected stores of grain and bronze, and personally interrogated merchants returning from the coast of Asia Minor. According to Plutarch, it was Cimon who transformed the Delian League from a defensive pact into an offensive instrument, methodically and without fanfare. The League had been formed after the victory over Xerxes as a coalition of Greek city-states for common defense, with each member contributing either ships or silver to a common treasury on the island of Delos. The concept was simple. Together, they were invincible. The reality proved far more complex. Most Greek city-states, though formally listed as allies of Athens, had long since opted to provide monetary contributions rather than ships. This was a convenience for wealthy merchants, but a death sentence for collective defense. Gold protects nothing if there is no one to pull the oars. Athens gladly accepted the bullion and built the ships itself. By 466 BC, the Delian League's fleet was effectively an Athenian fleet, and the allies increasingly realized that the line between protector and master was becoming dangerously blurred. But those were calculations for others. Cimon had his own. He knew what most Athenian politicians sought to hide from themselves. The 350 Persian ships at Eurymedon were not a show of force. They were the vanguard of an invasion. The Persian command was waiting for the Phoenician reinforcements from Cyprus to sail into the Aegean with a fleet so massive that no coastal defense could withstand it. The Greek cities and islands of Asia Minor, still hedging their bets between Athens and Susa, would immediately bow to such an armada. The path across the Aegean would be open. First, Attica would fall, then everything else. Cimon framed the question differently than his opponents in the assembly. It was not attack or defend, but when. The answer to the first question had been decided for him long ago. He requested 200 triremes from the allies. The council and the archons debated. They doubted. They calculated the risks. Cimon did not wait for a consensus. He began assembling the fleet. Recruiters flooded the markets of Piraeus. Shifts at the shipyards doubled. Summons were sent to the hoplites of Athens and the allied cities. Ships were refitted for a long campaign along the coast of Asia Minor. 200 triremes required approximately 40,000 rowers alone, not counting the Marines. Logistics on such a scale required months of planning. Cimon had started much earlier. Precisely when the Athenian assembly was still arguing over the expedition's size, Cimon already knew its objective: Eurymedon. The river the Persians had chosen as a secure rear for their armada would become their trap, provided the Greeks struck before the Phoenician reinforcements arrived from Cyprus. The window of opportunity was open, but not for long. And it was from the Athenian side that it first needed to be slammed shut. 200 triremes were not just a fleet, they were a floating city. And before they sailed, Cimon rewrote the very rules of naval warfare. The standard Athenian trireme was an instrument of speed, a narrow hull manned by 170 rowers across 3 decks. The doctrine was simple: deliver a ramming strike with the bronze beak and withdraw before the enemy could recover. This was how they fought at Salamis and Mycale. Speed over armor, maneuver over mass. This had been the Greek way for decades. Cimon abandoned it. At the shipyards of Piraeus, carpenters received an unusual order: broaden the decks, remove some of the rowers' benches on the upper tier, raise the gunwales. The objective was to accommodate significantly more heavily armed hoplites on each ship than the standard design allowed. The ships became heavier, losing speed and maneuverability. The engineers understood the trade-off, and so did Cimon. He gave the order anyway. His logic was simple and brutal. The Persian fleet at Eurymedon was anchored in the mouth of a river. The narrow confines deprived a massive armada of its ability to maneuver. In such a space, the speed of Greek triremes lost its value. There was no room to accelerate or veer. In a confined engagement, the number of hoplites on deck decided everything. If the ramming strike did not sink the enemy immediately, the fight would turn to boarding. And in a boarding action, victory went not to the faster ship, but to the superior steel and training of the men on deck. Plutarch records this decision explicitly. Cimon equipped his ships not only for ramming, but for carrying a large complement of hoplites capable of boarding enemy vessels. This is no mere historical interpretation. It was a documented technical pivot that altered the outcome of the campaign before the first shot was fired. While the sound of axes rang out in Piraeus, rumors spread along the coast of Asia Minor. Cimon was assembling a fleet. 200 ships, heading east. Within weeks, word reached the cities that were officially part of the Delian League, but quietly continued to pay tribute to the Persian king. There were many such cities. The Greek colonies on the coast of Asia Minor lived in a state of constant dual hypocrisy. To Athens, they sent contributions to the allied treasury and assurances of loyalty. To the Persian satraps, they sent taxes and guarantees of neutrality. Their rulers convinced themselves this was not betrayal, but pragmatism, survival. A small city could not wage war against an empire. Cimon did not share this logic. More accurately, it did not interest him. He sailed south along the coast of Lycia, and every city in his path was forced to make a choice. To open its harbor meant providing the fleet with water and provisions, siding with the Delian League, and incurring Persian wrath. To close its gates meant facing 200 triremes packed with heavy infantry. For most small Lycian communities, the choice was swift. They opened their harbors. But one city refused: Phaselis. Phaselis was a major trading port at the junction of Lycia and Pamphylia. Wealthy, fortified, and possessing long-standing trade connections with both the Greeks and the Persians. Its rulers calculated the situation and decided that the 200 Athenian ships would eventually pass, while the Persian Empire would remain. They believed it was more advantageous to wait them out. Cimon's fleet appeared off the walls of Phaselis at dawn. The ships formed a line along the coast, blockading the harbor. Negotiators sent from the shore returned empty-handed. Phaselis stood its ground. Then began what Greek sources call a siege, but what was essentially a harsh economic and military strangulation. Cimon's ships intercepted every vessel heading for the city. Fishermen were barred from the sea. Trade routes were severed. Hoplite detachments landed on the shore. Phaselis was faced with a simple calculation. How many days could it hold out without food? The resolution came from the Chians, allies of Athens who still supplied ships rather than just money. Chian sailors knew Phaselis well. They had traded there for years and maintained connections within the city walls. They offered Cimon an unconventional solution. Instead of an assault, they used letters. Messages tied to arrows were shot over the city walls. The Chians explained to the besieged what they already knew, but refused to admit. The Persian fleet at Eurymedon could not protect Phaselis. It was too far away, and too preoccupied with its own waiting. Arrows with messages flew for several days. Then, the gates opened. Phaselis joined the Delian League, paid a lump sum of 10 talents, and pledged ships for the expedition. Cimon recorded the result and moved on, eastward along the coast of Pamphylia, toward the dark waters of the Eurymedon, where 350 Persian keels waited for reinforcements that would never arrive in time. The Persians' wait was coming to an end, but not in the way their commanders had envisioned. Phaselis had fallen without a single assault, but Cimon's next lesson would be harsher and far more costly for those who received it. The Lycian coast stretched eastward in a series of rocky capes and small bays. Each inlet was a potential anchorage, each city a potential enemy or ally. Cimon moved methodically. He did not hurry, understanding that by the time the fleet reached Eurymedon, there must be no hostile ports left behind to cut his supply lines or relay intelligence to the Persians. This was not paranoia. It was the essential logistics of war on a foreign coast. The Greek cities of Asia Minor, for the most part, chose prudence. A single look at 200 triremes anchored in their roadsteads usually replaced the need for lengthy negotiations. Cimon did not threaten where it was unnecessary. He offered terms that could be accepted with dignity: membership in the Delian League, participation in the expedition, and a guarantee of safe trade routes under Athenian protection. The wording suggested partnership, but in essence, it was an ultimatum wrapped in diplomacy. However, Phaselis had demonstrated a vital point. Not all cities read the situation the same way. Some rulers looked beyond the horizon to where the Persian armada lay and asked themselves, what happens when Cimon leaves? The Persians always remain. The satrap would not forget those who opened their gates to the Athenians. Trade connections with the interior of Asia Minor, built over decades, could be lost in a single season. The benefits of an Athenian alliance were abstract. The revenge of a Persian governor was concrete. It was this calculation, rather than idealism or loyalty to the king, that drove the resistance. It was fear of what would come after. Cimon understood this fear. He countered it in the only way possible, by making the cost of resistance immediate. Persian retribution was a threat for tomorrow. The Athenian fleet was a threat for this morning. Cities that resisted longer than necessary were given a demonstration. Hoplites landed. Fields outside the walls were trampled or burned. Fishing boats were seized or destroyed. There were no mass killings or destruction of walls, only surgically precise economic pressure against which a small coastal town had no defense. After a few days, the rulers would emerge to negotiate. This method worked not because it was cruel, but because it was predictable. Every city knew the longer they resisted, the more expensive their capitulation would be. Cimon did not improvise or seek vengeance. He executed the logic of coercion with the meticulousness of an accountant. When the Athenian fleet approached Phaselis, a city that had already learned its lesson and opened its gates, the atmosphere aboard the ships had changed. The crews had bonded. The hoplites had grown accustomed to the widened decks. The trireme commanders knew the limitations of their modified vessels and had adapted to their altered handling. They had sailed the length of Lycia without losing a single ship or suffering serious casualties during a landing. But it was here, off Phaselis, that fresh intelligence arrived. The Persian fleet had not sailed out to meet them. It still lay at the mouth of the Eurymedon. The Persian commanders, Tifrostes and Pharnabazus, were paralyzed. Their strategy was simple: wait for the Phoenician ships from Cyprus. 80 additional triremes were expected to arrive and tip the numerical balance to an overwhelming advantage. Only then would the Persian fleet sail into the open sea to seal off the Aegean. Cimon set down the report and studied his maps. The 80 ships had not yet arrived. The window was still open. But it would close, and no one knew exactly when the Cypriot reinforcements would appear on the horizon. Delay was no longer caution. It was a defeat that had not yet happened, but was already predetermined. The fleet weighed anchor at dawn. 200 triremes left Lycian waters and set a course east along the Pamphylian coast. The rowers maintained a steady, rhythmic pace, conserving their strength. Cimon stood at the prow of his flagship. Ahead, a few hours' sail along the rocky coast, lay the mouth of the Eurymedon. There, in the dark, heavy waters, the Persian armada waited in a false sense of security. The Persian lookouts on the shore did not yet know what was bearing down on them from the west. They were expecting Phoenicians. They would find Athenians. And that gap between expectation and reality was the very space upon which Cimon built his entire strategy. The mouth of the Eurymedon greeted the Persian fleet with silence and stillness. This was not an accident. It was a choice. Tifrostes and Pharnabazus had made a decision that seemed reasonable on paper: stand fast and wait. They would not risk the armada in the open sea until the Phoenician reinforcements arrived. 80 additional triremes would make the outcome of any clash mathematically certain. The Persian strategists thought in terms of mass. More ships meant less risk. It was the logic of an empire accustomed to crushing opposition with sheer numbers. Their camp was established directly on the riverbank, a vast, sprawling complex. The Persian land army was positioned along the shore to screen the fleet from any landward threat. The commanders' tents stood on a rise, offering a clear view of the river, the ships, and the sea. Logistics were sound, provisions were ample, and the men were rested. They believed the Phoenicians were only a few days away. This confidence was not unfounded. The Persian fleet at Eurymedon was a formidable force. 350 warships manned by elite Phoenician and Cypriot crews. The Phoenicians were the finest mariners in the eastern Mediterranean, building ships that the entire region emulated and commanding fleets that everyone, except the Athenians, feared. The mere presence of such an armada on the Pamphylian coast was enough to deter the Greek allies from open defiance. Yet, that deterrence was the problem. By remaining stationary, the Persian fleet fulfilled its function without firing a shot. As long as it remained there, the cities of Asia Minor would continue to hedge their bets. Tephrostes understood this. His armada was a political instrument that exerted pressure simply by existing. The flaw in this strategy was that it required the enemy to be both aware of the threat and intimidated by it. Lookouts were posted along the shore. The morning at the Eurymedon began as any other. River mist, the cry of birds in the reeds, the changing of the guard. Fires were lit under cauldrons in the camp. The Persian fleet bobbed at anchor in the estuary. Ships packed so tightly that a skiff could barely pass between them. 350 hulls, 350 crews. The horizon appeared empty. Then, one of the lookouts turned his gaze to the west. What he saw could have been mistaken for low-hanging clouds at first. A dark band hugging the water that slowly, inexorably, began to take shape. Masts, sails, a forest of them. The lookout could not immediately grasp the scale. Then, the realization hit. These were not the Phoenicians from Cyprus. The sails of the Athenian triremes rounded the western cape one by one. Dozens, then scores more. 200 ships, sailing in battle formation, filled the horizon from edge to edge. Chaos erupted in the Persian camp. Officers sprinted for the commander's tents. Rowers, caught off guard, scrambled for their vessels. 350 ships, previously dormant, began to move in a frantic, uncoordinated mess. There was no contingency plan for a surprise engagement. Tephrostes emerged from his tent and looked toward the river. His fleet was not ready for battle. That much was painfully clear. The ships were anchored without a defensive line. Half the crews were still on shore. Many rowers had not yet reached their benches. Anchor cables remained taut. Oars had not been distributed. He shouted the order. The fleet was to sortie from the estuary immediately, to meet the enemy and form a battle line in the open sea. There they would have room to maneuver. There they could leverage their numerical superiority. In the open water, his armada would cease to be a congested mass and become what it was meant to be, an overwhelming force against which the Athenians stood no chance. The order was sound, but its time had already passed. While the Persian ships struggled to weigh anchor and form up for sailing, the Athenian fleet continues its relentless advance. Cimon gives the Persians no time to regroup. His triremes surge forward, sails furled, rowers pulling with every ounce of strength. The distance between the fleets closes faster than the Persian commanders can issue their next command. The waters off the mouth of the Eurymedon are no longer a safe Persian rear. They are becoming a battlefield. And it was not Tephrostes who chose the ground. The Persian ships are moving out of the river mouth into the open sea, a decision that kills them before the first ramming strike even finds its mark. Tephrostes' order was correct, but it came too late. To move into the open sea, to form a battle line, to use numerical superiority, all of it was logical. But between the command and its execution lay a chasm that the Persian high command failed to bridge. 350 ships, crowded in a river mouth without formation, do not transform into an organized fleet on a whim. They need time. Cimon grants them none. The Athenian triremes advance in close order. Their bronze-sheathed rams, weighing several hundred kilograms each, cut through the water at the waterline. The rowers work in silence, moving in rhythm with the flutist. 170 oars on each ship dip and rise in perfect unison. This is no frenzied assault. It is mechanics, the well-oiled, practiced precision of men who have spent more time at the oars than Persian infantrymen have spent in formation. The Persian fleet emerges from the river mouth piecemeal. The lead ships are already in the swell, while those behind are still untangling anchor ropes. There is no battle formation, no line. There is only a mass of vessels moving in different directions, fouling each other's way, with orders shouted fruitlessly across the water. Cimon sees this and gives the only possible order: forward. The first impact is a sound, the sharp, dry crack of splintering wood like a gunshot. The bronze ram of an Athenian trireme bites into the hull of a Persian ship just below the waterline. Then comes another such sound, and another. Along the entire line of engagement, there is the screech of metal on wood and the cries of men thrown from their benches by the sheer force of the collision. A triremes ramming strike is the culmination of acceleration over several ship lengths. A 50-ton vessel, moving at nearly 10 knots, drives its ram into the enemy's side with enough force to pierce the hull through and through. Water floods the breach instantly. The crew of the stricken ship has minutes, sometimes less. But at the mouth of the Eurymedon, the ram works differently than it does in the open sea. In open water, classic tactics are simple: accelerate, strike, ship the oars at the last moment to avoid breaking them against the enemy hull, backwater to withdraw the ram, and reset for another run. This requires space that does not exist at the river mouth. Emerging from the narrows, the Persian ships find themselves immediately pinned against the Athenian line. Those behind push those in front. Those in front cannot retreat. Maneuvering in such a crush is impossible. The Persian triremes, built in Phoenicia and famed for their speed and agility in open water, become nothing more than unwieldy barges in this tangle of hulls, oars, and rigging. The oars are the first to go. The long wooden blades, projecting from the hulls at water level, cannot withstand contact with a neighboring vessel. As one hull scrapes another, entire banks of oars snap with a deafening crack. A ship shorn of its oars on one side instantly loses steerage, swinging broadside to the enemy. It is the perfect position for a killing blow. The Athenian helmsmen see these openings and exploit them. Where a Persian ship has lost its oars and turned sideways, an Athenian trireme strikes the vulnerable flank, where the planking is thin and the ribs are few. Water gushes into the hold. The crew abandons the oars and claws for anything that floats. But this is where Cimon's modifications to his ships come into play. Broadened decks, extra hoplites. Where a standard trireme would disengage after a strike to reset, Cimon's ships hold fast alongside the enemy. Hoplites hurl grappling hooks, ropes tighten, locking the hulls together. Then, the heavily armed Athenian infantry leap onto the Persian decks. This is a different kind of war, not one of maneuver and speed, but of iron and shield. The Persian crews are primarily sailors, not warriors. The Phoenicians are masters of the sea. They know how to handle sails in a gale and navigate by the stars. They do not, however, know how to hold a line against a hoplite in full bronze panoply, who advances behind a wall of shields and does not stop. Along the entire line of engagement, boarding actions erupt. Shouts rise in a dozen languages. Persian archers manage to loose a few desperate arrows before falling to spear thrusts. Phoenician sailors dive overboard, preferring the water to the steel. Ships catch fire as oil lamps are overturned in the holds and flames find the tarred wood. Smoke begins to tower over the river mouth, visible from the Persian camp on the shore. There, on the banks, thousands of Persian infantrymen stand paralyzed, watching their fleet die. The naval engagement at the Eurymedon lasts for hours. When it finally ends, the Persian fleet has ceased to exist as a fighting force. Roughly 200 vessels are captured or sunk. The remnants of the armada, those few that manage to break free from the crush, flee toward the shore. Crews leap into the water and swim for their own lines, convinced that the land will save them from the Athenian triremes. They do not know that Cimon has already made his next move. Panic is not merely an emotion. In war, it is a physical process that spreads faster than any command. It begins the moment the first Persian crews abandon their ships and dive overboard. Not because their ship is sinking, and not because an order was given, but simply because someone was the first to decide that the shore was salvation. That was enough. The Phoenician sailors, experienced, skilled veterans of dozens of campaigns, watch as their neighbors abandon their posts. In such moments, cold calculation works against discipline. If the neighboring ship is being abandoned, the situation must be worse than it appears. If everyone is jumping, then jumping is the only logical course. The logic of a panicked crowd is swifter and simpler than any strategy. Ships still capable of movement turn toward the shore. Those already locked in combat with the Athenians become the scenes of short, hopeless melees. Persian archers loose their final arrows at point-blank range before retreating to the stern. Phoenician sailors arm themselves with boarding axes and daggers, tools for rigging, not for fighting hoplites. The Athenians advance shield to shield, as if on solid ground. The deck of a Persian ship becomes as cramped as a city alleyway. There is nowhere to retreat and no room to flank. Plutarch describes the slaughter without embellishment. The Athenians boarded the ships and killed those who remained. There are no heroic details, only the grim reality of the work. The burning ships create a new catastrophe. The tarred wood of the triremes burns with a fierce intensity. Black columns of smoke rise over the river mouth, visible for miles. A burning ship drifting among the mass of vessels becomes a lethal threat to everyone nearby. Persian crews use their oars to push away from the flaming hulls, only intensifying the crush. Those who jumped overboard are drowned in the chaos, crushed between hulls that continue to grind together by inertia. The spectacle witnessed by the Persian infantry on the shore is devastating to the morale of an army on the brink of battle. They watch as the finest fleet of the Persian Empire is reduced to drifting wreckage and drowning men. The 350 ships are gone, replaced by smoke, splinters, and bodies clogging the water. Those who swim to shore crawl onto the sand stripped of weapons and gear, wet, gasping, and useless for the coming fight. They have ceased to be sailors and have not yet become infantrymen. They are merely survivors, and their presence in the camp demoralizes the land soldiers more effectively than any report of defeat. The Persian command attempts to restore order. Officers form the infantry along the shoreline. The formation holds. The Persian land army is not the fleet. It is not in a panic. It has seen the disaster on the water and is preparing for what comes next, an amphibious landing. The Athenians will come ashore, and they will be met. The logic is sound. The Persian infantry is numerous and fresh. They are armed and standing on solid ground, while the Athenians have spent hours in grueling naval combat. The hoplites are tired. The rowers are exhausted. Military logic dictates, let the enemy land, then destroy them on the beach. But while defensive lines are being drawn in the Persian camp, something is happening on the Athenian ships that the Persian commanders did not factor into their calculations. Cimon summons his triarchs, the ship captains, right there on the water. The discussions are brief. He does not ask for opinions. He announces a decision. The fleet will proceed immediately to the shore. The hoplites will disembark and attack the Persian camp before nightfall. Right now, without rest. Among the triarchs there is silence, not of protest, but of men who understand the weight of the order. Their hoplites have spent hours in boarding skirmishes on heaving decks. Their rowers are at their breaking point. Their ships bear the scars of battle, shattered oars, pierced hulls, and scorched timber. And they are being asked to immediately assault a fresh land army waiting for them in full battle array. It is here that Cimon explains his reasoning, something most commanders would not do. He does so not out of gentleness, but because his men must grasp the logic to execute the order. The Persian camp has watched their fleet be destroyed. They have seen the ships sink and the survivors crawl ashore broken. The Persian infantry is holding its lines now, but they hold them as men who have just witnessed a catastrophe. Psychologically, they are no longer the army that stood there this morning. Give them the night, and they will recover. They will find their resolve, receive new orders, and fortify their positions. By morning, they will be significantly harder to break. Now is the only moment when the numerical superiority of the Persian infantry cannot compensate for their moral collapse. Plutarch records that Cimon deemed it a disgrace, after such a victory at sea, to allow the Persians to rest peacefully on land. He led the hoplites in an attack while the enemy was still reeling from defeat. This is no legend. It is a documented tactical decision by a man who understood war as a continuous process, not a series of isolated battles. The triremes turn toward the shore. The hoplites check their gear, spears, shields, helmets. The shore nears slowly, agonizingly so for men who know what awaits them on the sand. The hoplites stand on deck in full panoply. The bronze helmet weighs 2 kilograms, the breastplate another 6. The aspis shield, wood faced with bronze, adds another 6 to 8. Then the 8-foot spear and the short xiphos sword at the hip. In total, more than 20 kilograms of metal and wood weigh upon men who have already fought for hours on rocking decks. No one removes their gear. No one asks for a reprieve. This is not courage in the abstract. It is something more reliable. The Athenian hoplites are not raw recruits or seasonal mercenaries. Most have served through multiple campaigns under Cimon's command. They know his methods. They have seen them work at Sestos, at Byzantium, and along the Lycian coast. Cimon does not throw lives away without calculation. If he says the attack is possible now, then it is possible. That is enough. Cimon stands at the prow of his flagship. The shore is only a few stadia away. The Persian infantry is a clear, dark line of shields and spears at the water's edge. Behind them lie the tents of the camp, the supplies, the prisoners, and the gold in the campaign chests. The Persian infantry does not yet know that the battle is already lost. They do not know it simply because Cimon already does. The shore nears. The hoplites stand ready. The first wave, heavy infantry driving straight into the heart of the Persian line. The second wave follows immediately, denying the enemy any chance to regroup. The triremes drive as close to the shore as possible, grounding their prows in the sand. The hoplites leap into the surf, wading through the shallows. There is no time to seek a better landing spot. On the Persian shore, the view is different. Tifrabst sees the triremes beaching and understands the Athenian intent. His infantry stands firm. This is not a broken fleet, it is a land army that knows its trade. The Persian infantry at Plataea held their ground against Greek hoplites for hours. Persian archers can loose a dozen arrows a minute at ranges a spear cannot reach. Light cavalry stands ready to hammer the flanks of the Greeks while they are still struggling in the water. All of this is true. These are the facts a commander must weigh. And yet, behind the Persian lines sit the survivors from the ships. They huddle in groups among the tents, wet, unarmed, and silent. They say nothing, but their silence is louder than any command. The soldiers in the ranks feel that silence at their backs. That morning, this army had a fleet. Within hours, it had vanished. Now, the Athenians are coming for them. The first triremes strike bottom, prows digging into the sand. No ramps are needed. The water is only knee-deep. The hoplites leap out in succession. The shallows churn white with foam and frantic movement. The weight of the armor pulls at them. Every step through the water is an ordeal. Formation is impossible in the surf. This is the most vulnerable moment of any landing. The Persian archers seize it. Arrows fly in high, dense arcs. Some hiss into the water, others clang against shields. A few find gaps, an exposed shin, a shoulder, the space between helmet and breastplate. The first Athenians fall before they even reach dry land. The rest keep moving. This is no frenzied charge. It is a relentless, rhythmic advance, like the incoming tide. The hoplites emerge from the water one by one, then two by two, closing ranks on the wet sand. Shields are raised. The formation takes shape on the move, not from a halt, but in constant motion under fire. This requires a level of drilling that cannot be bought. It can only be forged over years. The Persian infantry waits.
By every rule of defense, this is correct.
Let the enemy exhaust themselves reaching the shore. Let them struggle onto open ground, and then hit them with the cavalry and a central assault. But the cavalry does not move. They sit on the right flank and watch the water as more hoplites disembark. The cavalry commander waits for orders that do not come, as Tifrapst hesitates, paralyzed by the unfolding situation. The window for a flanking maneuver opens and shuts. The Athenian line is ashore now, fully formed, shield to shield, spears leveled. The phalanx begins its march. Plutarch records it simply. Despite their fatigue, the Athenians, emboldened by their success, rushed the enemy. Inspiration is the word of a historian writing centuries later. On the beach at the Eurymedon, it looked different. It looked like 2,000 men laboring up a sandy slope with 20 kilograms of iron on their backs, facing a fresher, larger army that held the high ground. They advance because Cimon said, "Now," and because every man in the ranks understands that the morning's work on the water only matters if it is finished here. A partial victory over a fleet that will simply rebuild over the winter is no victory at all. It is merely a delay. The Persian line waits on the crest of the slope. The distance closes. 100 paces, 70, 50. The Athenian hoplites break into a run. The clash of a phalanx is not the rhythmic clanging of swords seen in a play. It is the dull, heavy thud of wood on wood, metal on metal, and the visceral impact of bodies slamming together. The Athenian phalanx slams into the Persian line at full tilt. The first rank of hoplites levels their spears an instant before impact. Shields are thrust forward, the weight of the entire body behind them. The shock is absorbed by the frame, not the arms. The Persian line, archers, light infantry, and regional mercenaries, takes the blow and buckles. It does not break immediately, but it bends. The Persian archers in the van manage a few point-blank volleys before being swept aside. An arrow at that range can pierce bronze, and men in the Athenian front rank fall. But the formation closes over them instantly. The second rank steps forward to fill the gap. The phalanx does not stop. This is the defining trait of the formation that the Persian command underestimated in every encounter. An individual Persian warrior might be more skilled, faster or more ferocious than his counterpart. But the phalanx is not a collection of individuals. It is a machine where every man's shield covers not just himself, but the left side of the man beside him. Such a machine can only be stopped by shattering its flanks or sowing total panic. As long as the formation holds, it moves. As long as it moves, it destroys. The Persian infantry falls back on its traditional strengths. The archers retreat behind the first rank of spearmen, continuing to rain arrows over their comrades' heads. Mercenary infantrymen thrust their spears into the Athenian shields, searching for gaps. Several Persian units attempt to wheel around the Athenian line, targeting the points where the formation is thinnest and the outermost hoplites lack the protection of a neighbor's shield. Cimon perceives the threat to his flank instantly. Orders are dispatched at once. The reserve units, having marched in the second wave, pivot to cover the edges of the line. The flanking maneuver stalls. The Persian units find themselves crashing into fresh infantry instead of an exposed formation. In the center, the battle becomes a crush. The term is more accurate than battle. The two lines have locked together, pressing shield to shield. Spears are useless in such tight quarters, too long with no room to maneuver. The men in the front ranks drop their pikes and draw their swords. The xiphos, a short sword of about 60 centimeters, was forged for exactly this kind of close-quarters slaughter.
A low thrust beneath an enemy's shield. A lateral cut to an unprotected thigh. These are the precise, economical movements of men trained for this since childhood. The Persian mercenaries fight a different war. The akinakes, the Persian short sword, serves a similar purpose, but it is backed by no aspis, no rigid formation, and no second rank to brace the front line and prevent retreat. The Persian warrior fights as an individual. The Greek hoplite fights as part of a mechanism. The mechanism grinds forward. The Persian center begins to buckle, slowly, a step, then two. But this backward momentum changes everything. The rear ranks of the Persian infantry are blind to the front. They hear the roar of combat, feel the pressure of the front ranks receding, and do what the rear ranks of any army do in such a crisis. They begin to look behind them. A soldier looking back is a soldier looking for an exit. It is the beginning of the end for discipline. Persian officers see the rot and try to stem the retreat with shouts, blows from the flats of their blades, and personal examples of bravery at the front. Some officers do indeed charge forward, a futile display of courage. The problem is not a lack of individual bravery. It is that the army, having witnessed the destruction of its own fleet hours earlier, has already reached a psychological conclusion. This is not cowardice, but a sober assessment of reality that has proven stronger than military discipline. The left flank of the Persian line breaks first. There stand the Anatolian allies, men fighting for Persia out of obligation rather than conviction. They see the center giving way and realize the right flank has received no reinforcements. They reach a simultaneous, independent conclusion. To stay is to be encircled when the center collapses. They must leave now. The left flank wheels and retreats toward the camp. This becomes the signal for the entire line. Not a command, not an order, but the undeniable sight of a mass of men moving in one direction. The center sees the flank give way and begins its own retreat, faster now. The right flank, suddenly isolated, makes the same choice. The retreat turns into a rout within minutes. The Persian infantry bolts for the camp, the Athenian phalanx in pursuit. The rigid formation of the frontal assault cannot be maintained during a pursuit. It dissolves into groups and individuals. Hoplites run,
tearing off their helmets as they go, as the bronze casings blind their peripheral vision. Their heavy panoply slows them down, but speed is secondary to momentum. The goal is to prevent the Persian army from rallying at the camp walls. Cimon drives his men onward. No stopping, no reforming. Relentless pursuit is a calculated decision, not a mere impulse. An army granted the time to reform behind walls becomes an army again. An army driven without pause remains a mob of terrified men looking for an exit rather than a target. The gates of the Persian camp loom ahead, wide open. Thousands stream through. The Athenian hoplites surge through the gates alongside the fugitives, pressing so close that the gates cannot be barred in time. The camp is open. An open camp is not yet a victory. It is the start of a different kind of labor. Dirty, close quarters, and no holds barred. The Athenian hoplites flood through the gates on the heels of the Persians. At this moment, the formation dissolves entirely. The phalanx is a weapon of the open field. Amidst tents, depots, and wagons, it is useless. Here, the battle fragments. Men fight in small groups of 3 or 4. Behind every tent, a separate skirmish. Behind every wagon, a different fate. Persians who reached the camp first attempt to organize a defense. Some take cover behind wagons, loosing arrows down the narrow lanes between tents. Others rally around their officers, attempting to hold a line on the camp's main thoroughfare. This is genuine resistance, not a symbolic gesture. Several Athenian hoplites fall in these narrow alleys. Point-blank arrows find the gaps in armor that the phalanx would have shielded in open battle. There is no formation here, only reaction time and luck. But the momentum of the breach overpowers local resistance. The Persian pockets are isolated, blind to what occurs behind the next row of tents. With the defensive line shattered, the command structure has collapsed. No orders arrive. Each group decides its own fate, and most reach the same conclusion. Lay down your arms. Raise your hands. Come out from behind the wagon. The tally of prisoners swells. The Athenians herd them into the center of the camp, guarded by those too exhausted to continue the pursuit. The guard is thin. Most hoplites are still clearing the camp. The prisoners stand in silence. Phoenician sailors, Persian infantry, servants, camel drivers, and cooks. The camp of a great army is more than a garrison. It is a city with its own infrastructure. And now, that city belongs to Athens. The commander's tents stand at the center, grand pavilions fortified with wooden stakes. Inside lies the baggage of the Persian high command, campaign chests, scrolls of dispatches and maps, ornate personal arms, silverware, and bags of coin for the payroll. There are stores of provisions for the officers, far superior to the common rations. The Athenian soldiers open these chests. The contents exceed the wildest dreams of even the most battle-hardened veterans. The Persian army had not come to the Eurymedon to campaign through barren lands. It came as the arm of an empire that had extracted tribute from half the known world for centuries. Gold jewelry, silver ingots, coins from a dozen mints, exquisite inlaid weapons, and fabrics that would cost an Athenian craftsman a year's wages. Controlling this process is a commander's secondary battle. An army lost to looting ceases to be an army.
Cimon, knowing this, posts officers to ensure the spoils are centralized. The rule is only partially observed. It is ever thus. Small trinkets vanish into cloak folds and shield linings, but the bulk, the chests, the ingots, and the captured naval stores, is inventoried and placed under guard. The Persian wounded are a separate matter. Those unable to flee and yet to surrender
are found huddled between tents and beneath wagons. Greek sources are sparse on these details. Thucydides mentions the camp's capture only briefly. Plutarch offers more detail, but does not linger. This was the standard practice of 5th century warfare, recorded by historians without comment. Resistance within the camp withers within hours of the breach. No organized Persian force remains, only individuals making individual choices. Most choose surrender. At this point, Tithraustes vanishes from the historical record. Whether he fell in battle, escaped through a rear gate, or surrendered remains unknown. The silence of the Greek historians is telling. A defeated commander of whom nothing more is said is either dead or too insignificant to warrant a footnote. The sun dips behind the Pamphylian mountains as the clearing of the camp concludes. The Athenian hoplites, who had stormed the gates hours earlier, now sit among the tents with spears grounded. Their armor is cast aside, their wounds bound with makeshift bandages. They eat Persian rations distributed among the rows of captured pavilions. The exhaustion of such a day is singular. It is not the weariness of hard labor or a long march, but the fatigue of men who have lived for hours in a state of high-tension survival, where every second demanded total effort. Now that the tension has snapped, the body is at a loss, struggling to process the sudden silence after such a cacophony. Cimon walks the camp, surveying the prisoners and the spoils. He receives reports from triarchs on naval casualties and from infantry commanders on the losses ashore.
The tallies are recorded. Decisions on the distribution of booty are deferred until morning. But one decision is made immediately. Not tomorrow, and not after he has rested. A report arrives from reconnaissance vessels patrolling the western coast. The 80 Phoenician ships from Cyprus, the reinforcements the Persian command had so desperately awaited, have finally appeared on the horizon. They are steering for the Eurymedon, oblivious to the slaughter at the river's mouth. They are sailing to meet a fleet that no longer exists. 80 Phoenician ships sail toward the Eurymedon. They are in no rush. They have no reason to be. The crews are ignorant of their fate. They sailed from Cyprus to reinforce Tithraustes, covering hundreds of stadia along the coast. To them, this is a routine passage, destined to end at anchor alongside 350 Allied ships in the safety of the estuary. There, they expect a warm welcome, a shared camp, and rest before the campaign begins. They do not know the camp is gone. They do not know the fleet they were to reinforce has been captured or burned, the land army scattered, and its commander vanished. They do not know that Athenian hoplites are currently sitting on the banks of the Eurymedon, feasting on Persian stores. Cimon receives the intelligence and issues an immediate command. Fatigue is no excuse. Darkness is no obstacle. If those 80 ships enter the river at dawn and witness the carnage, they will wheel back to Cyprus. They will carry word of the catastrophe to the heart of Persia. They will remain a potent force, ready to return by next summer. What is left unfinished today will become a threat tomorrow. The triremes are relaunched. Rowers who had just begun to rest return to their benches. There are no arguments, no delays. Cimon does not explain himself twice. The Athenian fleet puts to sea under the cover of night, intercepting the Phoenician squadron before first light. The Phoenicians are unprepared. They sail in cruising formation, not battle order, their ships strung out along the coast. Lookouts are at half strength. No one expects an enemy in these waters. They expect friends. When the Athenian triremes loom out of the dark, the Phoenician commanders have only minutes to react. It is not enough. Transitioning from cruising to battle formation requires daylight and calm seas, not a pitch-black night with the enemy already at ramming distance.
Plutarch's record is brief. Cimon fell upon the Phoenician ships and destroyed the majority. It is a dry summary of a chaotic night battle. Ramming actions in the gloom, fires on the water illuminating the next target, crews leaping into the Black Sea, ships drifting derelict until dawn. By morning, only a fraction of the 80 ships remain. The survivors flee towards Cyprus. The report they carry to the Persian High Command will be grimly accurate. The fleet is gone, the camp is lost, and the Pamphylian coast lies open to Athens. This report will change Persian policy in the Aegean Sea for decades to come. In Susa, the news reaches the royal court weeks later. The Persian reaction is defined not by what the sources record, but by what they omit. There is no rush to prepare a new expedition, no decree to build a fleet for vengeance. The Persian Empire is a colossus capable of replacing 350 ships in a few years. It chooses not to. Not for lack of means, but because Eurymedon fundamentally altered their sense of the possible. The Aegean is no longer a Persian lake. The Ionian cities, long accustomed to hedging their bets between Athens and the satraps, finally have their answer as to who is stronger. One by one, doors are slammed in the faces of Persian tax collectors. The Delian League achieves its raison d'être, a monopoly over the Aegean. Athens receives something else. The spoils of the Eurymedon, ships, arms, gear, and the gold from the commander's coffers constitute a staggering windfall.
Plutarch notes that a portion of this booty funded the southern wall of the Acropolis. A wall built with Persian gold is no metaphor. It is a physical monument. Athens rebuilt itself on the ruins of the Persian effort, with the same cold method Cimon used to dismantle it. The allies of the League watch this construction and draw their own conclusions. He who controls the fleet controls the sea. He who controls the sea controls trade. And he who controls trade sets the rules. The League, born as a defensive pact among equals, transforms into an instrument of Athenian hegemony, with the same crushing inevitability that saw the Persian center buckle before the phalanx. This was not Cimon's stated objective before he sailed. It was simply the reality of his success. Cimon returned to Athens laden with ships, prisoners, and gold. The assembly hailed him as a hero. His triumph was earned. In a single day off the Pamphylian coast, he had annihilated a fleet, routed an army, and intercepted a relief force. 3 objectives that would have taken any other commander 3 separate campaigns. Thucydides describes Eurymedon as a double victory, sea and land won in a single day. It is rare praise from a historian usually so sparing with it. He merely records the fact, and the fact speaks for itself. The Battle of the Eurymedon never captured the public imagination like Marathon or Salamis. It lacks the simple narrative of legend, the underdog against the empire, the desperate last stand, the miraculous salvation. At Eurymedon, the roles were reversed. Athens struck first. Athens chose the ground. Athens executed the campaign with a precision that left the enemy no room for error. This is not a tale of survival, but of a threat dismantled before it could manifest. It was a preemptive strike launched at the precise moment the window of opportunity opened, before the Phoenician reinforcements could close it. History does not record the what-ifs. What if Cimon had hesitated for a fortnight? What if the 80 Cypriot ships had joined Tithraustes before the Athenians arrived? What if the Persians had found the time to form their line of battle? It records only the reality. 200 triremes sailed at the critical moment, and the window slammed shut, with the Athenians on the right side of it. A power that relies on mass and patience will always lose to one that masters timing and strikes before that mass can deploy.
This is no revelation. It is a historical constant that recurs with such regularity it should be an axiom. Yet every generation of commanders must rediscover it, some through the glory of victory, others through the bitterness of defeat. At the Eurymedon, this discovery cost the Persian Empire several hundred ships, one army, and control of the Aegean Sea. The question is not of Cimon's genius, but of the cost of hesitation, and who pays that price in blood. Would you risk everything for the chance to break two armies in a single day? Or would you huddle behind your walls, hoping the enemy defeats himself?